I was home alone, sitting in my room, lost in a long Call of Duty session. It was sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning, one of those silent, heavy hours where the world feels like it's holding its breath. The kind of hour where even the smallest sound feels louder than it should. That's when my phone lit up with a call from an unfamiliar number. My first instinct? Probably just a wrong number, or maybe someone screwing around, prank calling strangers. I let it ring a couple of times, then declined the call and went back to my game. No big deal. But a few seconds later, the same number popped up again. That gave me pause. It wasn't just some random misdial. Whoever it was had decided to call back. I could feel a subtle, creeping chill crawl across my shoulders. Still, I told myself it was probably just some bored teenager messing around. I figured if they were going to waste my time, I'd waste theirs right back. So I picked up. "Hello?" I said, my voice already edged with annoyance. Nothing. No one said a word. But I wasn't greeted with silence. Instead, I heard a sound. Quiet at first, but unmistakably unsettling. It was like a hiss. The closest thing I can compare it to is a cat hissing, but deeper, way deeper, almost guttural, unnatural. For a second, I just froze, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Then instinct took over, and I snapped into defensive mode. "Look, buddy," I barked into the phone, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If you call this number again, I'll have my friend, he's a police officer, track this call and have you arrested." I waited for a reaction. I expected the line to go dead, or maybe some curse words. But instead, I got something else. Laughter. Low, slow, and deeply pitched. The kind of laughter that doesn't belong to any normal person. The kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. My heart dropped. I could feel the blood drain from my face as the fear started settling in, cold and sharp. "Why are you calling?" I asked, more quietly now. Then I heard it. A voice. Not a whisper, not a mumble. It was clear, deep, cold, almost demonic. And it said, "I'm just waiting for you to come upstairs." I couldn't move for a second. My body just locked up. That voice didn't sound like it came from across town or through some prank app. It felt close. Too close. Then, like something had suddenly snapped in my brain, I bolted. I didn't stop to think or check anything. I just ran, out the front door, down the driveway, and straight across the street to my friend's house, adrenaline flooding my body the entire way. I banged on the door until his dad answered. My words tumbled out in a rush, half coherent, panicked. I begged him to call my dad. He looked confused, but something in my voice must have told him I wasn't just fooling around. After he made the call to my dad, he immediately called the police as well. The officers arrived within 5 minutes. They searched the house from top to bottom, every room, every corner. Upstairs? Nothing. No one. But the back door? Wide open. My dad used to be a paramedic. Even after he retired, he stayed in touch with many of his old co-workers and friends from the job. One of the closest among them was my godmother, Sally. Sally ran a bunny farm. Yeah, a literal farm full of rabbits. And she was one of the kindest, warmest people I've ever known. My family adored her, and eventually my parents made the decision to name her my godmother. She'd always been like family to us. But Sally had a brother. His name was Terry. Terry was different, quiet, distant, the kind of person who lingered in the background but never said much. There was something off about him, an energy, maybe? Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He wasn't around often, though, so I never paid it much attention. That changed one Thanksgiving. We all decided to spend the holiday together. Sally, Terry, and my family. The dinner itself was great. Everyone was laughing, sharing stories, passing around food. But even with the cozy glow of the holiday, Terry's presence seemed to cut through it all. I couldn't relax. Something about him, his silence, the way he watched the room without really being part of it, made my skin crawl. Later that evening, my godmother and I were sitting at the family computer. We were working on something together, nothing important, just fiddling around online, chatting while we clicked through tabs. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Terry and my little brother sitting in the family room. Curious, I excused myself and walked out to check on them. They were just sitting there, watching TV, nothing out of the ordinary, no conversation, no interaction, just a quiet room lit by flickering colors from the television screen. I stood there for a second, unsure why I felt so uneasy. Something about the image of the two of them sitting in silence unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. The next day, we all went to church together. That's when Terry approached me, casually, and asked a strange question. "Hey," he said, "does your brother have a Facebook account?" I blinked, a little caught off guard. "No," I answered truthfully. "My brother wasn't into social media, never had been." But the question stuck with me. Why did he want to know? What reason would a grown man have for trying to connect with my much younger brother on Facebook? I couldn't shake the feeling. Not long after, Terry sent me a friend request. I hesitated before accepting it. His profile picture wasn't of him. It was that creepy, hooded, anonymous figure you see floating around online. No personal photo, no real identity. Just that blank, faceless image staring back at me. Weird. Why wouldn't he use his real photo? Why hide behind that? Then I got a message from him. Just a simple notification at first, but when I opened it, the chat box slid up with his name. The conversation had started, and that was when things really began to feel wrong. "Hey there," his message popped up on my screen. I hesitated for a second, then replied, "Hi." "What are you doing up so late?" he asked. "I'm a night owl," I typed. "I'm usually up late." He responded almost instantly. "Doesn't that make your parents mad?" They don't mind," I answered. Then came a message that made me pause. "A naughty girl, aren't me? Staying up late. Would you like to chat?" My stomach tightened. There was something off about his tone, too familiar, too strange. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a creeping sense of discomfort settled over me like a cold fog. I forced out a reply. "Actually, I gotta go now. I have homework." Before he could say anything else, I immediately switched my status to invisible and closed the chat window. My heart was racing. What the hell kind of conversation was that? Why was he talking to me like that? It felt wrong, so wrong. He spoke to me like I was someone else, like I was something else, like I was part of something I didn't understand and didn't want to. Curiosity burned in my chest, even though I knew I shouldn't feed it. I clicked over to his profile. He hadn't blocked his friends list. I stared at the screen, then slowly began scrolling. And what I saw, what I felt, it still haunts me to this day. His friends list had over 200 people. All of them were boys, teenagers, every single one. Young boys between 14 and 18 years old. I kept scrolling. My hands were shaken. Some of the profile pictures were innocent, just smiling faces. But others were unsettling. Not all were just smiling photos. Some felt disturbingly suggestive, posing in ways that no teenager should ever be presenting themselves online. And a few crossed lines I didn't even want to think about. I felt sick, truly sick, not just in my stomach, but deep in my bones, in my soul. It wasn't the fact that he might be into men. I wouldn't care if he was gay. No, that wasn't it. This was something else entirely. Terry was hunting these boys, grooming them, collecting them. That's why he wanted to know if my brother had a Facebook account. He wanted to add him. He wanted to pull him into that twisted, disgusting circle. I sat frozen at the computer, barely able to breathe. He was in his 40s, and he had created this secret online world full of vulnerable teenage boys. My mind reeled. I felt betrayed, terrified. I loved my godmother, but this was monstrous. My hands were trembling as I got up and told my parents everything. I didn't hold anything back. My dad's face turned pale as I explained, but strangely, he didn't look entirely shocked. His mouth tightened, his eyes darkened. He sat down and said, "There were things, rumors." Then he told me something that made everything worse. Apparently, Terry had already made the news once. He had been reported for dealing drugs to kids, and worse, touching them. One of the boys had accused him. It had all come out publicly. But then, the case was dropped. The boy said he was lying. And just like that, it all went away. But now I wonder, were they really lying? We cut off all contact with Sally and Terry after that. My godmother, who we had once considered family, was suddenly a stranger. Her silence in all of this, whether she knew or didn't, felt like betrayal. Terry's Facebook account was eventually taken down. I reported it, and others must have too. But still, I know he's out there. I know people like him don't just stop. Sometimes at night, I wake up in a cold sweat thinking about him, imagining him watching me, imagining him going after my little brother. And in those moments, the fear comes rushing back, sharp and suffocating. Because monsters like Terry don't just vanish. They wait, and they hunt. My parents had recently bought a cabin way out in the woods, a little getaway spot tucked far enough from the city that they could unplug and unwind on the weekends. They absolutely loved it, and so did my little sister. She'd go up there with them every weekend without fail. Me? I usually stayed behind, which meant I spent a lot of weekends home alone. It wasn't bad, really. I actually enjoyed the quiet sometimes. But on this one particular night, I was bored out of my mind. The house was dead silent. the kind of silence that made the ticking of the wall clock sound like a hammer. So I dropped myself onto the couch, fired up my console, and started playing The Legend of Zelda to pass the time. Now, over the years of living in that house, I had developed this sort of automatic reaction, a weird, almost Pavlovian response, every time someone called my name from upstairs. My bedroom was in the basement, so whenever my parents needed something, they'd just call down the stairs. "Brandon!" And without even thinking, I'd pause whatever I was doing, walk over to the bottom of the stairs, and call back. "Yeah?" It happened so often that I'd trained my ears to pick up even the faintest sound from upstairs, always alert, even during games, music, or deep concentration. That night was no different. As I sat there, completely immersed in Hyrule, I suddenly heard it. Brandon. A voice calling from upstairs. Without thinking, I instinctively paused the game and stood up. My feet moved before my brain did, like muscle memory had kicked in. I started walking toward the staircase. But about halfway there, I froze. Wait, my parents weren't home. Neither was my sister. I stood still, blinking at the top of the stairs as my mind slowly caught up. The house was supposed to be empty, just me, Zelda, and silence. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just so used to hearing their voices from upstairs that my brain played a trick on me. I shook it off with a nervous chuckle, turned around, and headed back to my game. Back to the glowing screen, back to adventure, puzzles, and fantasy. But I hadn't even made it 10 minutes into the game when it happened again. Brandon. This time it was louder, sharper, more deliberate. I paused. The hairs on my arms slowly rose as the voice echoed faintly from above. And this time, it wasn't my father's voice. Actually, it wasn't anyone from my family. It was unfamiliar, flat, and strangely calm, but wrong in a way I couldn't quite explain. For a split second, I considered the possibility that maybe it was a neighbor, but that didn't make any sense either. I know my neighbors well. I've heard all their voices 100 times, from barbecues, parties, casual greetings in the yard. This, I didn't recognize it at all. And something about that hit me in a place deeper than logic. A place that whispered, "You're not alone." I bolted upstairs, heart pounding, the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the empty house. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" No answer. The silence that followed was so complete it pressed against my ears like thick cotton. I stood at the top of the stairs, scanning the hallway, the living room, the kitchen, everywhere my eyes could reach, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, something felt off, a tension in the air, like the moment right before a thunderclap. Drawn by a rising sense of dread, I walked toward the dining room. There's a large window there, gives a perfect view of the street outside. Our house sits at the very end of a cul-de-sac, so from that vantage point, I could see every house lining the street, all the way to where it opens up into the big circle of asphalt at the end. And that's when I saw him. Standing under the dim yellow glow of a street lamp, alone, was a figure. A tall, unmoving silhouette, cloaked in shadow. I squinted, trying to make out his features, anything to identify him. But the longer I stared, the more it became clear that this wasn't just some late-night jogger or neighbor out for a smoke. There was something deeply unnatural about him. Then I noticed it. A small detail, but one that made every part of my body turn to ice. He had no shadow. None. He was standing directly beneath a streetlight, his body illuminated from above. So logically, a shadow should have been stretching out below him. I looked between his legs, behind him, even around him. Nothing, just bare asphalt, no shadow at all. My breath caught in my throat. Then, as if on cue, the streetlight above him flickered. Just once, for a fraction of a second. And when the light came back on, he was gone, vanished. I staggered back from the window, cold dread washing over me like a wave. No longer caring how irrational it seemed, I raced through the house, double-checking every door, every window. I locked the front, the back, the sliding glass doors, and even the garage entrance. Every latch clicked shut like the beat of a desperate heart. Then, without thinking, I ducked into the closet beneath the staircase, the one place that felt the most hidden, the most secure. I shut the door behind me, sat on the floor, and clutched my Nintendo DS with trembling hands. I needed a distraction, anything to drown out the thoughts crawling through my mind. So I played Pokémon in the dark for hours, until the morning light finally started seeping under the closet door. I never slept that night, and even now, I still don't know what I saw, or if it ever really left.